dragged against his chest, his shallow breaths hot against Brian's skin. The explosion hurled them both through the air. Instinct took over. Brian twisted mid-fall, shielding the boy as they crashed to the ground. Pain flared through him, but he held tight. The earth trembled. Fire roared. His body screamed in protest, but survival left no room for hesitation. With the child secured in his arms, Brian ran. He broke through the smoke, and then her. The boy's mother. Her eyes locked onto them, wide with...
The one on the top floor was taking a long time getting into the car. Cursing the condo, the building manager, and his own rotten luck, Ezio rushed for the stairs. Derek stood in their doorway and watched his father. And that's when Derek noticed how the hallway floor reflected the light in odd ways. The floor looked wet. Derek realized that the janitor had just washed the hallway, but had forgotten to put up the wet floor sign. That was dangerous. Someone could slip and really hurt themselves. Even die. Derek smiled. Yes, at last. It happened all in an instant. Ezio was just starting down the stairs when his foot slipped. Derek could have warned him. He could have rushed over to grab his father. But instead, he stayed put and watched nature run its course. Ezio tumbled down the stairs, going down several flights as he screamed. At the bottom of the steps, his body was a broken mess, all his limbs bent at unnatural angles. Derek grabbed his phone and took several photos to prove that the floor was wet and there was no warning sign. Already, he planned on hiring the best shark law firm he could find and suing the building management firm. Only then did he carefully walk down the stairs to confirm Ezio's death. His father lay there, incapable of speech, his eyes fixated on Derek. He was silently begging for help. Derek grinned. Haven't I learned from your example, old man? You're the one who said I should never delegate. If you want something done right, do it yourself. Wasn't that how it went? Your phone's in your pocket. Take it out and call 911. I'm a useless dumbass after all. I don't want to screw up calling for help, Daddy. Ezio's eyes were full of shock and hate. Then his head went limp, his gaze blank. Derek suppressed gleeful laughter. Instead, adopted his best terrified son expression and started shouting for help. When the ambulance arrived, he made sure to squeeze out a few tears. They comforted him, believing he'd done everything he could to save his father. Bunch of idiots. As always, Derek's mother was too obsessed with her problems and feelings to bother looking for a lawyer to manage their lawsuit. She left everything in Derek's hands. That's how he was able to kill 3 birds with 1 stone. After careful research, he contacted and hired the best lawyer they could afford. Derek also arranged to be the client instead of his mother. Mr. Thompson looked surprised to be dealing with a young teenager. You're sure your mother can't help you out, son? My mother hasn't lifted a finger for me since the day I was born. I want her looked after, since she gave me a life and all. But I don't want to see her again when this is over. He told Mr. Thompson everything. Derek spoke about his father's accident, the abuse the boys had suffered over the years, and the need to split the settlement money 3 ways. 1 portion would go to their mother, 1 to Derek, 1 to Carl. Both kids were very firm on one special point. They wanted the lawyer to start the process to get them emancipated. With the money from the settlement and Ezio's life insurance policy, they had enough to be self-sufficient until Derek grew up. What followed was the happiest period in their life. Before long, they were emancipated minors with cash in their pockets. They moved away from their mother's place and never saw her again. Derek doubted she even noticed they were gone. They used their portion of the money to settle up and make proper plans for the future. Over the following years, bullies weren't a problem. Derek and Carl both became martial artists and had each other's backs. Having their own place allowed them to experience having friends and girlfriends over. Their domestic nightmare was finally a thing of the past. They suffered many disappointments, though. Too many so-called friends only wanted to use their parent-free house as a party den. They also struggled with being normal teens. While their peers only wanted to party and skip class, the boys focused on studying and saving as much as possible. Derek and Carl would work part-time jobs during the holidays and vacations to keep themselves afloat. They weren't poor, but not rich either. They knew they had to save as much as possible for a rainy day, but they had a good life. Derek got a scholarship and obtained a bachelor degree in chemistry, soon followed by a master's in biochemistry. Carl did well too. He got his engineering degree, was studying for his master's, and already had a fiancée. Despite being really happy for his little brother, seeing Carl in love was a painful thorn in Derek's side. He had always been the more socially inept of the two. He never managed to get into a stable relationship, not even in college. Derek had problems talking to girls. The problem lay in his inability to trust. He had many crushes, but never fell in love. At the beginning, he blamed bad luck, or thought the girls shallow. After finding and losing more than one good girl, he blamed his past. But Carl's own success in love made Derek blame himself. Carl had suffered the same things, but he'd come out of it stronger and purer than Derek. Derek was just too scared of being hurt again. That fear was one enemy he could just never beat up. Derek accepted a decent job working the night shift at a big chemical company. Carl had told him that he wanted to marry his fiancée as soon as he got his master's. That gave Derek 2 years to save enough money to give his little brother a decent wedding. Derek didn't like his job, but it was a way to start his career. Also, it was well paid, and he resolved to use the company insurance to seek psychological counseling. He knew he had problems and wanted to work on them. Derek consulted several doctors before finding someone he felt was a good fit. After several months, he was finally starting to make progress. But alas, such happiness could not last. It was a Friday evening, and Derek was getting ready to go to work. He was still stuck working the night shift because the pay was too good. Maybe he could have gotten a job he liked better somewhere else, but money was still too important. No matter how many times Carl said he wanted a small ceremony, Derek told him not to be cheap.
But it's only a ceremony. The real thing is spending the rest of your life with someone, Carl had said. We haven't had a ton to celebrate in our lives, Carl. I want you to have the kind of wedding you deserve. You've overcome too much shit to cut corners in the best parts of your life. You've always been such a romantic, dude. Carl had laughed and punched Derek's arm. Yeah, romantic. Sure, right. But Derek meant it when he said he wanted Carl to have everything good in this world. Derek looked at the magnet on the fridge as he walked through the kitchen adjusting his tie. It said save the date in big yellow letters over a picture of Carl and his fiancée hugging on a hiking trail. Derek smiled. Whenever he saw his little brother looking happy, he felt his life had been worth something after all. Derek was just shrugging on his jacket when his phone went off. The ringtone wasn't one he recognized. That meant it wasn't a pre-programmed number. Usually that meant it was a spam call, and Derek was ready to hang up and let it roll to voicemail. But something about the number gave him pause. The area code looked local, which was unusual for a spammer. Derek felt a lump in his gut he couldn't explain, and picked up the call. Derek Esposito, who is it?
Mr. Esposito, this is the St. Joseph Hospital.
The female voice sounded worried. Her concern, along with the word hospital, sent a shiver down his spine.
Sir, is Carl Esposito your brother?
She asked. Derek could almost hear her biting her lip. She was seriously worried.
Yes, what happened? He was involved in a car accident and is in critical condition. You should come down here as soon as possible. The doctors need you since you're his healthcare proxy, and the patient is unconscious. A car accident?
Derek rushed out the door and looked for a cab on the street.
How the hell is that possible?
We don't even own a car. What the hell happened?
I'm sorry, I'm not at liberty to say. The doctors will explain.
Derek hung up on her. He had no time for talk, only for a goddamn cab. Every second in traffic was torture. Derek called Carl's fiancée until he remembered she was out of town at a conference. He left her a voicemail, saying he hoped he'd have good news for her soon. When he finally arrived at the hospital, though, it was too late. The look on the doctor's face told him everything he needed to know. That it was all over. That his life was a complete wreck.
What happened?
Derek sat down. If he didn't sit, he'd collapse to the floor.
Mr. Esposito was crossing the street when a driver took the corner too fast and hit him. In the crosswalk? How could the jackass not see my brother?
I believe the man behind the wheel was intoxicated. Police are currently investigating. I'll pass you over to them soon. The police told Derek what the doctor had. The drunk driver had run over Carl and sped on, never looking back once. A bystander had called 911, but the bad traffic had caused a delay in the ambulance. That had shaved critical moments off Carl's chances of survival. It had been a hit and run. If that monster had stopped to help Carl, there was a good chance he'd have been all right. When Carl arrived at the hospital, he'd already been in critical condition. Multiple skull fractures, a ruptured spleen, and internal bleeding meant he'd require immediate surgery. They'd called Derek just as Carl was entering the OR. By the time Derek arrived, it was over. Carl had suffered too much blood loss. He was gone. The police and the doctors offered Derek their condolences, but all he could hear was white noise.
Let me see my brother.
Carl's body was covered by a sheet. Only the head was visible. The back of his little brother's head was crushed from the blow to the pavement, and freckles of blood covered his face. Derek left his number with the police officers so that they could keep him posted about the investigation. He returned home and called Carl's fiancée, but once again, he got voicemail. He told her flatly that Carl was dead, hung up, and then put his foot through the glass coffee table. By the time he had finished his rampage, half the furniture in the apartment was broken. Derek sat there among all the broken chairs and splintered wood and waited. He waited for them to catch the bastard who did this and bring him to justice. Thanks to traffic cameras, the culprit was quickly apprehended. The perp was a kid, barely 17 years old, who'd stolen his old man's car and then got drunk and high with his friends. He was a spoiled rich brat, one who treated other people's lives and property like garbage. Derek had the funeral. He spent the money he'd saved for the wedding on Carl's coffin and tombstone. He comforted his brother's fiancée, then let her disappear from his life. Brat house arrest. Derek's little brother, his Carl, was dead because of this jerk, and the creep got to live at home in luxury. How could they just give him bail? Derek would yell and argue with anyone willing to listen to him. The judge kept on talking about the little brat's rights and his future. What about my brother's rights? What about his future? Carl has none because of him. What kind of justice is that? Derek visited the DA multiple times, expressing his outrage and demanding they ask for the maximum sentence. They were always kind, and they promised him not to forget about Carl. When the day of the trial finally came, Derek's world died one more time. The DA and the defense attorney had come to a settlement. The defense argued that offense, taking his whole life away over one mistake, seemed unfair. Chris had agreed to go to rehab and do 600 hours of community service. If Chris completed his rehab program and committed no crimes over the next 3 years, his criminal record would be expunged. He'd be free as air. Derek was too amazed to even be angry. When court was adjourned,
He walked to the DA and asked a single question. Why? The assistant DA, kind and patient as ever, explained to Derek that Chris was a kid from a good family that had made a dumb mistake. He had a brilliant future ahead of him. Chris had already been admitted to Caltech. This was his first offense. Also, his parents had hired a great lawyer. The judge, a father of teens himself, had been unwilling to destroy Chris's life. Derek did not make a scene. His fire was extinguished. He had no more tears to shed. After the trial, Derek simply went through the motions. He kept to his routine like nothing had happened, his brain refusing to look at the nightmare his life had become. The only thing that made him feel alive was a constant headache that started shortly after Carl's death. The doctor told him it was stress-related after all that had happened. Derek swallowed aspirin like it was candy. But the pain only got worse. Derek finally found the strength to get a serious checkup. Once again, life handed him a pile of bad news. According to the full body scan and follow-up biopsy, he had stage 2 pulmonary cancer. But I've never smoked in my whole life, Derek exclaimed. He even laughed a little. This whole thing was too absurd not to be funny. Indeed, it's odd. His oncologist was quite puzzled. She was a good-looking Hispanic woman, maybe 5 years older than Derek. In another life, one where he didn't have cancer and his brother was still alive, he might have asked her out. You told me you worked for a chemical company, right? She asked. Derek nodded. Is that important? You're not a smoker and you're young. This cancer is too rare and too aggressive to be a coincidence. In my personal opinion, their ventilation system failed. You and God knows how many more people have been breathing poison for quite some time. But we wear masks whenever we work with chemicals. I can only speak for myself, but I follow the safety protocols to the letter. My colleagues are always teasing me for it. Derek remained in stunned disbelief. Maybe the masks are cheap pieces of junk. It wouldn't surprise me. These corporate scumbags only care about their profits. They'll cut corners wherever they can, no matter who it impacts. I wouldn't be surprised if they'd cut money from the safety budget to put a little extra cash in their pockets. The doctor was white with anger. They do this kind of thing all the time. Derek frowned. She just seemed too certain about where he'd gotten sick. He had to ask, Doctor, what are you hiding from me? She nibbled on her lower lip before answering. Between you and me, you're not the first person who works at your company to be diagnosed with this type of cancer. I've already reported it to the Department of Health. If I were you, I'd get a good lawyer and sue the tar out of these people. You'll need a lot of money for treatment. Since the cancer's so rare, insurance won't cover certain types of radiation. I'll lawyer up, but I don't want any treatment. I'll just take palliative care. The doctor gasped in shock. Look, we have a chance to beat this. It's not a great chance, but it exists. But the window where we can act is closing. If we don't start fighting this soon, you'll have 6 months to live, a year at best. We need to be proactive here. Derek couldn't help but chuckle at her constant use of the word we. We barely know each other, Doctor. I think you're a decent sort of person, so I want to be frank. We have nothing to do with one another. We aren't a team, Derek said with an icy tone. I don't mean you and me specifically. We as in the hospital. Your family and friends. What friends? I have no family, no loved ones. My little brother's ashes are all I've got left. I could die tomorrow and no one would notice. Do you think I'm desperate to stick around this place? I think you're young and could have a long life ahead of you. I think it's far too soon for you to give up. I'm not giving up, Doc. The universe finally showed me a scrap of mercy, and I'm taking it. They parted on bad terms. After he left the hospital, Derek called his old lawyer and explained everything. He was fond of Mr. Thompson. That guy had made the best years of Derek's life possible. They would still send each other Christmas cards. Mr. Thompson said the Esposito brothers were two of his all-time favorite clients. Thompson had more gray hair than brown now, but he was still world class. I can get you a fat settlement if you agree Chris Wainwright. The guy who slaughtered Carl and drove away without a scratch on him. Chris had gone to rehab as part of his court-appointed punishment. Evidently, rehab hadn't quite done the trick. The little jerk was holding a bottle of liquor, ill-concealed inside a paper bag. The murderer took a few healthy chugs from the bottle and staggered along, looking like he felt no pain, enjoying his life. Life. Exactly what he denied Carl. Chris was laughing loudly, his skinny arm draped around a teen girl who was showing a lot of skin. She wobbled along in stiletto heels, tugging down her miniskirt whenever it rode up. She took a long drag on a joint and traded the marijuana for Chris's liquor